And as you know, I think I said it a number of times that when you have these headings to Psalms, they're actually part of the original text. So we consider that as legitimately part of the Bible. So that's not like the editorial titles that were added as they were compiling editorial copy of the Bible. For example, I'm sorry this is getting complicated, but my Bible actually has a heading that says, "O Lord, do not delay." Well, that's a heading put on there by, I guess, Crossway that publishes ESV. I don't know, but that's not originally there, but that secondary smaller print is there. Now, verse 1. Make haste, O God, to deliver me. O Lord, make haste to help me. Let them be put to shame and confusion who seek my life. Let them be turned back and brought to dishonor who delight in my hurt. Let them turn back because of their shame who say, "Aha, aha." May all who seek you rejoice and be glad in you. May those who love your salvation say evermore, "God is great." But I am poor and needy. Hasten to me, O God. You are my help and my deliverer. O Lord, do not delay. Psalm 70, interestingly, is not the only place as that content is presented in the book of Psalm. Did I make sense? What I mean by that is this particular psalm appears in a different section of the Psalms as well. Namely, Psalm 40 at the end, verse 13 to 17, contains exact same contents that you will find in Psalm 70. Now, you might think that this is a rather waste of space. Why is it necessary that the exact same words needs to be repeated twice inside the Bible? Bible, the Word of God, every page is precious. Why do you have the repetition of the same over again in Psalm 70 from Psalm 40? And I would say the reason is, and I am putting some of my own, I guess, the interpretative guess, but likely scenario is that since Psalms is a book of hymn, basically, right? So like these days, everything's sort of up there on PPT, on projection. But you know how traditionally when you worship in the church, you have a hymnal, and hymnal contains various songs, usually 600-700 songs that are collected into one, and you use it in the worship. And our Korean congregation, for example, we still use a hymnal, and we don't quite do that in the EM. But hymnal is what Psalms is. Psalms was a hymnal for the Old Testament Israelite community and beyond. So Psalms is meant to be used as a congregational singing. So Psalm 70, likely scenario is that it was taken out of the context of Psalm 40 and it was put as a separate psalm because it was used frequently for a particular purpose. And if we go to the title that I mentioned, that it was used for memorial offering, or I guess different way you could put it is that it was used for a particular memorial holidays. So it was a holiday hymn. It was a hymn sung by the Israelites on specific holidays, and the question might be, what holidays are we talking about? And from the contents, I would say, well, this fits in any Jewish holidays or any Israelite holidays because, you know, when you think about these important festivals or holidays of the Israelites that comes from history, they're mostly some miraculous deliverance that God has done for the people. In the most desperate times, they cry out to God and God saved them. And these were memorialized as holidays, so the content being so full of urgent plea, "Oh God, do not haste, help us, defeat these enemies that are trying to seek our lives. Lord, come and save us." And that's the content of this particular psalm. So it could fit into any holiday, any particular holiday. And I thought about it, and then what one holiday that really kind of came to life as I read this psalm was a holiday called the Purim. And if you know what a Purim is, it comes from the book of Esther. And Esther was a queen in Persia. She was a Jewish woman who was selected to be the queen. And that story from book of Esther is very well known. And Sight and Sound is a place where you go to watch these dramatized Bible stories. Right now, Esther is the one that's being played, right? That's the one that's going on in Lancaster. But anyway, in the book of Esther, there is the evil villain named Haman. And Haman, for no reason other than just hatred for Jews, is going to massacre the entire race in the Persian Empire. And this is his evil plan. And the emperor falls for it without really thinking too much about it. What Haman did not know was that the queen was a Jew. And as the story goes, Esther, by the grace of God, is able to turn the tide and then save the entire race. And where the uncle of Mordecai, the uncle of Esther, was to be hung, and this was the evil scheme of Haman again, he set up a long pole on which he would hang Mordecai, the Jewish man that he really hated. And it turns out that Haman was hung on that tree instead. So this is the story, and at the end of the story, you hear about the holiday called Purim, and Purim comes from the word pur, which means to throw lot, and because that was a part of how that particular day was selected, day of massacre and so on. The deliverance happened on that particular day that Haman carelessly selected for the doom of the Jews, but that tide turns around, it turns out to be the doom of the enemies of the Israelites. And as that story goes, I think it fits perfectly with something like Psalm 70. And I could visualize on a holiday like Purim, the Israelites would get together, the Jewish people will get together, not only recite and read together the story of Esther, which they did every year, perhaps they still do, but they would have sung Psalm 70 as a hymn that fits so well with that particular occasion. This urgent need that the people have, crying out to God, God, help us. Think about it. This story was actually originated from David. David was a one man who was a king. He had many desperate moments in his life. So David had many of these "Help me, O God" hymns in the Psalms, right? And this one man's poem or hymn was taken out of that one man's life and was now transferred over to the life of the community of Israel. So a person's story now has been taken on by a community, and the community sing together, knowing that God has delivered David out of all kinds of trials, right? So the story of David becomes the story of Israel. That's the pattern that we see. And this is not at all strange for us because we call ourselves Christians. And if you are a Christian, I am. What that means is that we take the story of Jesus and we make that story our own. That's what a church is. Church is a community that celebrates the story of Jesus. And Jesus had sung many desperate songs himself. As Hebrews, the book of Hebrew would recall, the life of Jesus was full of groaning, full of tears and crying with loud sound. And can you imagine Jesus wailing? And that's the expression of Hebrew, that Jesus actually cried out to God out of desperation. In our behalf, he did that. And that one prayer that you can think about is Mount Gethsemane. The New Testament writers have songs about Jesus. Philippians chapter 2, about the very life of Jesus. He humbled himself, he emptied himself from the heavenly glory to the earthly agony. And he obeyed until he went all the way to the cross and gave his life wholly unto God. He died, but God raised him from the dead, and God exalted him to the highest place. Every tongue confess He is the Lord. Every knee shall bow before Him. It's a beautiful song of Jesus, right? But when you think about it, that's the song that the Christians sing together, because now it's our song. So in our struggles, in our suffering, we think about Jesus. Same thing happens in Ephesians chapter 2. We were dead in transgression and sin, but Jesus was raised from the dead. He was lifted up to the right hand of God, and we with Him are raised into the heavenly glory, seated with Christ in the right hand of God in glory. And this not by our works, but purely by God's grace. We are saved by faith as we depend on Him. Beautiful hymn. It's about Jesus, but it's about us. And that's what we have in Psalm 70. So when you read something like this, you need to sing it as a community. You need to sort of think about this as my experience, not somebody else. It's my experience that's coming out, because ultimately it's the experience of David, is the experience of Jesus as culminated in Christ, the true David. And it's that experience that's our experience. In all our hardships, in the desperate moments, we cry out to God, God, help us. God, help us. What is emphasized in Psalm 70 is not the deliverer himself. There's not a lot of description about who God is, but there's a lot about the one who is needy, the one who needs to be saved. That's us, right? There's a lot more about the one who is being delivered. You do have a little bit about God. For example, verse 4 declares God is great. Verse 5 says, you are my help and my deliverer. So God is such. He's a great deliverer. But a lot more about the situation of the person who needs to be delivered. Three things are descriptive of the one who's seeking to be delivered, right? And again, it should be about us. The first in verse 4, may all who seek you. So, first description of the people that needs to be delivered, these are the ones who are seeking God. I seek you, O God. That's what we have. Number 2, may those who love your salvation say more. Say evermore, God is great. So, not only are we seeking God, secondly, we love God's salvation work on us. The joy of God's salvation is with us. This anticipation of joy through hope that we will be saved. And in verse 5 is the third description. I am poor and needy. Poor and needy. Now, I'm just laying these out there, not to go through them in some careful order, because I think Psalms, when we read it, this is not necessarily something we analyze as such. We feel with it. We laugh with it. We cry with it. We are lifted with it. And what we have here is a description of the one who is so needy. And the needy one says, I am poor and needy. Therefore, I am seeking with all that I am. Seeking you with all that I am. And finally, therefore, I may be described as the one who loves your salvation. One who loves your salvation. It's a desperate time right now in Louisiana. You probably know. And I say it because we need to pray about the situation. It's the 16th anniversary of Katrina. Same New Orleans, the same location is hit by a hurricane right now at the moment, by a Category 4 hurricane, that is one higher than Katrina. Size is a bit smaller, they say, but it's a devastating situation happening. We need to pray about them. We need to pray about Afghanistan. We need to pray about Haiti. There's so many things that we need to pray beyond our own immediate comfort. Can you identify with them? Can you say, God, I am poor and needy. There's no way. There's no help available for me. So I am seeking you, God. God, give us relief. Protect us from this disaster. And we love your salvation. When you save us, when this is all said and done, and when the dust settles, we know that you saved us. You preserved us. We love that. We delight in that. We have the joy of salvation. And that's exactly what we have here. I want to focus on the phrase poor and needy. Poor and needy. These two words are two different words in Hebrew, but the meanings are so close together, and these words are used as a couple, like a twin, many places. And if you read on chapter 71, especially 72, verse 12 and 13, you will see the pair appearing again. I am poor and needy. And poor is more a focus on the fact that I have nothing to help me. I am utterly helpless. And that's different from rich. A rich person, are you rich? Maybe you are. We probably are. I think most of you are thinking like, oh, well, I don't fear an immediate disaster because I have help. I have enough money in the bank account to carry me for a few years. I have enough support people around me who will take me in when I'm in need. You may not be a billionaire, but to be rich means something like this: God, I'm not so desperate. I don't have that desperation, so my prayer is not filled with agony and desperation. Why? Because I think I could handle it, oh God. Just be there, when I need you, right? That's rich. That's being rich. And is that bad? Well, spiritually it's bad. I'll tell you why. Because it makes you numb. But that's a mistake on your part. Because if you know the immediacy of disaster in your life, like one that the rich man that was described by parable of Jesus didn't know. He said, I have everything I need. I'm going to be happy for the next several years. I'm not going to worry about anything. I am fully satisfied. And God said, I'm going to take your life away tonight. What will happen to all these things that you stacked up? See, desperation in relation to God is an awakening. It's not like there's one and there's none. It's not like you suddenly need God out of blue. You just are awakened to the reality that I need God, because without Him, without His grace that sustains me, there's nothing I can hold on to. So Jesus said, blessed are the poor. Not only in financial terms, but blessed are the poor in heart. For the kingdom of God is theirs. God's reigning presence. That's what poverty is, spiritual poverty. And needy simply means I have a lot of needs. Please excuse me for this expression that I'm going to say, and I hope it doesn't offend anybody, but I did hear a man come to me and say, my wife is a bit too needy for my taste. Well, I won't tell you who that man is because he'll be perhaps somebody not very much liked, but needy is not necessarily always a very positive thing, is it? In fact, it's mostly negative. When you have someone who's in need, of course, you're all good people, so, well, good, relatively speaking. You want to turn to help them, right? But what if that person is always needy? What if that person says, hey, I need you today, I need you tomorrow, I need you always? And the person is so much desperately dependent on you for love and attention and resource. And the likely scenario is that you don't want to hang out with that person because he is just too needy. That doesn't really help relationships very well, doesn't it? What am I saying here? Am I saying don't be needy? Well, I think ultimately we need to get out of that trap. Yes, we are needy people. There are times when we need things, and therefore I think we need to be rather honest about our needs, and oftentimes good communication is good, but we don't always trust people for our deliverance, our salvation. When it comes to our relationship with people, I think being needy shouldn't be a permanent condition. There are times when we need one another, but we don't always say, You are my salvation. Important to understand that Psalm 70, when it says, I'm poor and needy, that description is not to men, to people. It's to God. God, I am poor and needy. As some commentators would say, this is an expression of spiritual poverty and need. Because it's to God. Doesn't mean that I have nothing in my bank account. Doesn't mean that I am desperately sick. But what it means is that, God, I know that I need you desperately. For me to not know that would be foolishness. To be blinded to that would mean disaster to me because I need you. Oh, that's a good way to put it. I want to quote from John chapter 2. I love and thoughtfully reflect on this particular passage once in a while. It's about Jesus. Listen. Chapter 2, verse 23. Now when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover feast, many believed in his name when they saw the signs that he was doing. But Jesus, on his part, did not entrust himself to them because he knew all people and needed no one to bear witness about men, for he himself knew what was in men. If you heard this correctly, what it's saying is that Jesus would not entrust himself to people, even though the people were dazzled by his miracles. People cheered on. There was a massive number of people following Jesus to a point where it'll become a social nuisance. Jesus was popular. But what John observed here is that Jesus did not entrust him to the people because he knew what was in them. Now, don't ever mistake this to think that Jesus was therefore antisocial. Oh, not at all. Jesus was very social. Jesus was always with people. In fact, Jesus was known to be a glutton and a drunkard. And Jesus didn't quite deny that so wholeheartedly, in wholesale, because Jesus did enjoy eating with people. Jesus did enjoy drinking with people. In fact, there were leaders of the Jews who were upset because Jesus would eat and drink with so-called the sinners and the tax collectors, those spiritually very badly conditioned people. But Jesus wouldn't mind. Jesus, in fact, would love feasting with them to bring about newness, hope, and joy into their lives. So Jesus loved the people, yet Jesus would not entrust himself to the people. Jesus knew well what was in the people. Jesus didn't live for popularity. Jesus did not live for acknowledgement of people. Jesus didn't live to receive attention. Jesus didn't know. Jesus knew what was in the people. And as someone said, people are the objects of love, not the objects of your dependence, not your trust. You don't trust people absolutely. That doesn't mean you become cynical. That means you become realistic. You love them. The disciples of Jesus failed him. Peter denied Jesus 3 times. What did Jesus do? Was he upset at him and therefore that was the end of the relationship? No. Jesus did not depend on him. But Jesus loved him. Jesus restored him. And that restoration also meant, I want you to start over. Giving him an opportunity to start again. This relationship gets new spark. It's beautiful the way Jesus works out his relationship with the people. So when it comes to people, I think, again, we need to be very well put in our mind that we do not trust them or depend them absolutely, as we need to trust God absolutely. But rather we love. We have this sense of freedom, a room to fail and to accept failures, knowing one another, yet always encouraging to go to the right direction. That's what we need to do. But when it comes to God, we need to be poor and needy. We need to be poor and needy before God. I'm going to say a little bit about C.S. Lewis's book called The Four Loves that I started rereading this past week. It was almost coincidental. I picked that book up and it just went so well with this passage, so I would use it in my sermon today. I'm rereading that book and thinking again, this guy's pretty brilliant. God used him really well for our enlightenment. And in fact, in the beginning, in the introduction portion of that book, he analyzed the different kinds of love before he gets into those four loves. He divides love into two, and then ultimately to three. But two first, he says there's a need love and there's a gift love that we commonly experience in life. A need love and a gift love. Need love is a love that is driven by your need, by a specific need that you have that comes upon you. Gift love is indifferent. It's the, what do you call it? There's no condition. You just give to people because you give. You're a giver. You give. That's a gift love. Need love, example of that is, say, a stormy night. A child wakes in the middle of a night and he finds himself utterly lost in fear. And he runs over to the mom, to his mother, and he just buries himself into the mother's arms, and you just pour yourself into it. You call that love? Well, there's a love, almost a desperate love, and that love is driven by the need to escape this fear, need to somehow find comfort. And gift love, on the other hand, would be something like a mom who has a son who's just absolutely not doing well. A son who is not only just not doing well socially or economically, but just emotionally detached. A mom feels so horrendously rejected by the son, yet the mom never stops loving him, always giving him what he wants or what he needs. Just a one-way, unconditional giving. That we might call gift love. There are these two kinds of love, and Lewis says when early on in his life he thought, well, the need love is so impure, it's motivated by something that is not so pure, whereas gift love is such a holy, pure love. I mean, you give without any a condition. You're not looking for anything in return. That's why mother's love for the child is so holy, but a kid clinging to mom for things that he wants, it's just somehow unholy or something like that. But then he said, as time went on, as I thought more about it, I realized that that's not so easy. Life is a lot more complex than that. And he says, especially when it comes to God, our relationship with God, there are quote-unquote saints who say, I love God disinterestedly, which means what? There's no interest on my part for loving God. I love God purely. I love God for who He is. Not for my sake. I love Him as who He is, and say, that person is a spiritual giant. And Louis says, question mark, is that so? Because that verges on spiritual pride. But rather, a person who is so needy of God, like a deer panting for the streams of water, I long for you, to God. Is that impure for needing God? And the answer to that is no, that's absolutely right. Why? Because we are needy. God is the giver of life, and God is the giver of salvation. God provides all that we are and we have. Therefore, to not need Him would be wrong. So, in that sense, need love is the proper love that you have for God. And if you ever think that you love God disinterestedly, you have to think twice about that, whether that is really the case and whether that does not take you to spiritual pride. Lewis actually talks about this in conjunction, the closeness to God. There are two ways to be close to God. One is closeness by being like Him, resembling Him. Closeness by likeness. Second is closeness by approach, by getting closer to Him. And when it comes to God, there's a possibility that one say, I am like God. I could love people disinterestedly. I truly love my husband without condition. And that could easily take you to not only pride, and oftentimes when you look into it, it might actually turn out to be your obsession, if anything. So there's the danger. But on the other hand, when you are close to God by approaching Him, by getting near Him, that's exactly what we need to do every day. And that is very close to need love when it comes to our need of God. There's one more thing that we need to know about this situation. That need love is needed as long as there's a need, right? The need love seems to be need dependent. Thunderstorm ends and a child is happy to be on his own, playing with his own toys, may turn back on his mom, and even when mom calls him, son, he may not even turn around to look at mom because he's no longer needing her. You need water when you are thirsty, but when you are no more thirsty, when you are fully quenched, you don't say, I love water. A lot of times water is just water. It doesn't taste that great. You may have a feast before you, but if you are filled to a point where you cannot eat anymore, you may say, well, it's not that great. Whereas before, when you were hungry, you would say, I love this. But you don't love it as much. Why? Because there's no more need. And that's how we are. But then, what's really important for us to know is that our need for God is unending. Now, this is spiritually difficult because tendency that we have is that we think that we are self-sufficient. The tendency that we have is to push God out and say, I want to be independent. This idea of autonomy to be a rule unto himself is the very nature of sin. I do it my way. God, wait until I call you when I need you. Otherwise, don't bother me. But that's a grave mistake. That's a grave mistake. What we need is to know God as who He is. If we have the right theology, we know that God is always needed. And if everything departs from us, as long as God is with me, I can start over. Our God is the foundation. Our God is the very beginning of everything that I am and the end. I am the Alpha and Omega. We are so utterly dependent on God. Do you know it? Do you know it? Or are you like a leper spiritually? You know, leprosy, the Hansen's disease, is such a fearful one. Why? Because the nerve ends die as a result. What? You don't feel pain. Your body may be rotting. Your body parts fall apart, but you don't feel it. Therefore, you lose it. Spiritually, maybe that leprosy is rotting your souls, your hearts. Those of you and us who have been happy being in that kind of quote-unquote neutral place spiritually, are you sure? Are you not suffering from spiritual leprosy? Are you forgetting, like that foolish rich man, that without God you have not a moment? of meaning in your life. Let me close with this. You know how Christians say we are saved by grace, and that grace by faith, not by works? Let me define faith for you. What is faith? Faith is that posture of reception or receptivity in your heart for God's grace. Faith is a container in your heart that receives the grace of God. Faith is that need for God that you have in your heart, and it's a gift from God. For those who are heading to destruction, the people who do not know the desperation of the situation, that who would not evacuate, who would stay in the most dangerous place, not thinking, not taking it seriously that disaster is coming their way. Faith is what? Faith is listening to the emergency broadcast. Faith is being able to receive it and say, so it is, I must move. And if you're spiritually unmoving, if you're not spiritually desperate for God, that you are, quote unquote, living a life of autonomy, you know what that means? Faith is not operating, but your own work is operating. You're not saved by works, you're saved by faith. You need God. That's the need we need to feel every moment, every second. Let me call you all from Psalm 70 to this life. Lord, you are my help and my deliverer. Do not delay. Deliver me. Let's pray.